Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, we are joined by Heema Shah, who is a neuroscience consultant and educator and executive coach. She is the founder of Spiritual Sacred Space, a platform that fuses neuroscience with spirituality to help support people with their mental and spiritual well-being. In this episode, be prepared to learn the setup of mental health support available here in the UK, and the positives and drawback of our system, the challenge with mental health support in most Western civilizations, what neuroscience actually is, and its relationship with mental health, how to get the right mental health support tailored to you, and so much more. Before that though, this episode is brought to you by Riverside. Riverside is an online studio platform designed to record, edit, and share high-quality podcasts built for growth from day one. Powered by AI, you can record in 4K video or from your phone and automatically remove filler words such as ums, as, you knows, and many other speech patterns. Built for human conversations, Riverside makes it super easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to start your podcast and share your message with the world? Check out the link in the show note description to learn more about Riverside and get a 15%, yes, that's a 15% discount off a paid subscription. Now let's dive into today's conversation with Heema. Heema, welcome to Raising Consciousness today. How are you doing?
Good, thanks, Luke. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I feel like a long time coming. I think when we first spoke, it was like June, and this episode will be probably going out towards the end of December. So yeah, but we made it happen. So I'm pleased.
We made it before the end of 2024.
That's it. First question for you. Who are you and what do you do?
I am Heema. I'm a neuroscience spiritual research analyst, but I also practice in what I research as well. And the idea is to help people with their mental health challenges using a non-pharmacological approach.
And what's the why behind your work?
The people that have always come to me have always wanted to build autonomy and resilience with what they do, and they've always wanted to do it without the help of prescription medication. They've always wanted to find ways to do it themselves so they can sustain it as well and pass it on to others, and that's always been my why as the people.
And so, like, building on that, in terms of like your work from a societal kind of bigger landscape, I guess, why does your work matter?
Societal landscape. It matters because when we think of the numbers of mental health disorders, I think it's third in the list of when we think of the DALYs of how much of an issue this is when we think about mental health issues. They are not something that is just going to magically go away. They're not something that is just going to go from taking medication every day. There are things that will help sustain and manage and cope with the techniques, perhaps to help function every day. But when we go down to the core of what this is, if so many people are suffering, there needs to be more education around it. More people need to be informed around it. And that is not happening, in my opinion. Yes, we're very fortunate in this country, as an example. We have talk therapy that's available to us. I know we have a waiting list on the NHS, but it's still available to us. And they are trying to make new means to make it available for clients. That is more than I can say for some other countries that have this available publicly. We also have, when we think about the internet, and we think about the networks we have, you can do your own research. But of course, if you don't know what you're looking for from a mental health perspective, you're not going to know what to look for, right? We have, when we think of ChatGPT, there is, for example, ScholarGPT is a great resource to look at research papers, like latest mental health and neuroscience research, knowing what we can do to implement into our own lives. But if you don't know what you're looking for, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, right? If you don't know your stress, for example, you're not going to know what you're looking for until somebody points out or until your body breaks down and says enough is enough. And that's often what happens with burnout, as an example. We have all these symptoms and they slowly build until it gets to the point that your body needs to protect you and it shuts down and it says you're not doing anything else. And that's when the burnout kicks in. And often people confuse that with depression, and they're very different because, of course, burnout can happen repeatedly in your life, as can depression, but burnout can have even more of an effect when we think about sustaining that life force, whereas depression, it does shut down to the point that you cannot function if it's extreme depression. With stress and extreme chronic stress, the people I've worked with have managed to function still on it. It can take them years to get to the point of saying, I need to change my lifestyle. So we think about going back to the question of societal landscape. You think every single person on this planet, if they're going through some kind of mental health challenge, imagine the strain it puts on resources as an economy, as a complete society. How is a society expected to function if the people in it themselves aren't aware of how they can look after themselves? We know that has a strain financially when we think about people not being able to work. That also puts a strain on when we think of people receiving benefits. If they themselves do not have a purpose, as an example, if they're on disability benefits, they don't have a purpose to work, or they don't have a purpose to get out, or a purpose to move forward. That can sometimes further their symptoms. And I'm talking about the people that I've worked with. I'm not talking about generally speaking, but this is people I've worked with. This is from the research I've done. We think from a societal point of view, the strain it puts on everybody. It doesn't make a flourishing society, right? When we think that individuals are perhaps going through isolation, and loneliness is a new one. That they've started to include that into questionnaires now. When we talk about anxiety and low mood, loneliness is another measure. So you think loneliness, isolation, low mood, anxiety, stress, I could list a handful of what pressures it can put on society. We think, parents, how are they being able to function and look after their children, which of course children are our future. When we think about societal influences, there's so much that goes into mental health challenges that if we're not informing and educating people from a societal point of view to build their autonomy and resilience when it comes to mental health, how do we expect the society to function?
So what should, and I hate the word should, but anyway, I digress. What should people be looking for if they don't want to go down the kind of the standard medical kind of route? And so they do turn to the internet, what should they be looking for? What should they be looking for, or like typing in, if anything, like, because I'm just thinking like a group of people that don't want to go down, like, let's just say the standard route. So then they turn to the internet, right? And there's like all this stuff on the internet, some good, some not so good, some bad. And as you're saying there, they don't necessarily know what to type in. So they're kind of at that crossroads, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And as you said, and I'm going to go back to what you just said, there is information and there's misinformation. And we know that. And with social media at our fingertips, it's so easy, especially when you're having mental health challenges, to listen to what these so-called experts are saying. And when I say so-called expert, I'm not saying that they're not, but sometimes they themselves may have ulterior motives to promote a product. They may have ulterior motives of what they're saying. It may not be the most current up-to-date research that works for that client. And very much like you said, what can people look for? Well, first of all, I would always say if you're UK-based, going to your GP is your number one. So we as a nation, we are allowed to call up our GPs. And if you're going through a mental health emergency, they should be able to put you on the phone to a GP straight away. So they should always be your first port of call. You've also now got NHS 111 as well as a non-medical emergency. And you can call up with your mental health challenges as well. So if your GP out of hours, or perhaps they, for whatever reason, they just don't have any appointments available to you, call them 111 on your phones, and you can directly link with a mental health practitioner that can at least help you during that. Something that also, when you get in touch with a GP, is they will also put you in touch with networks. So a very common one, for example, is the service user network. And what this means for those who are on a waiting list, an example for talk therapy, and don't necessarily have the support or means to get through these mental health challenges, it's a daily Monday to Friday, it's a working day product. So Monday to Friday it's available. And once you've gone through the protocol with them, for example, they'll go through emergency procedures, they will text you every day and say, between these hours, we are having a phone call. And it's all anonymous. So you come on and you'd link up and they just check in with you. It's they're lovely groups. They check in with you. They're run by mental health practitioners. They check in with you and everyone will talk about perhaps a challenge that they're dealing with on that day. And the idea is that as a group, you help each other, but you've also got the practitioner to step in and say, okay, what can we do while you're coping with this? It's just a sounding scape with whatever you're going through, because often it's not easy to speak to your family. It's not easy to speak to your friends or perhaps your work colleagues. or even your partner, because you just sometimes feel like it's just too stressful. They often may not be supportive. They may not know the right answers to give to you. And sometimes that can exacerbate your symptoms as well with whatever you're going through. So this group just allows you to have that objective space. So you know what? I'm suffering. This is what I'm going through. And they're brilliant. They're so warm-hearted, these groups, and the support you get from other people that's going through things. And they're completely different. You know, the symptoms and the challenges we're going through are completely different, but the coming of together is so beautiful when you're feeling that way. And just to hear somebody maybe give you words of motivation, or just say, you know what, it's okay, or just give you space to cry, whatever your experience is so cathartic in that moment. And so you've got a few things. So you've got, it's known as a SUN, so Service User Network. Call your GP first port of call. You've got NHS 111. You've also got, I'm going to say AI. Okay, so AI is available for you 24/7. So you have digital mental health apps that do have that in place where you're typing, because sometimes you're not in the mood to talk as well. And while I do, Luke, I'll send you a list of resources of numbers on there for different challenges, and they're free to call, but there's also text services that you can just text, because often when you're going through mental health challenges, that's often what happens. You often don't have the strength to even have the camera on, let alone talking to another human being. So sometimes texting can just be a form of communication, just to allow you to get that mental health support that you need during that time. So those are some of the starting points. If you have the means, you can of course have private talk therapy as well. Now again, this is where it gets a bit tricky, because of course when you're going through these challenges, often it takes quite a lot to get to the point of searching for someone. And as you said, Luke, if you don't know who you're searching for, the internet is just very overwhelming. So what you can do is, again, talk to your GP and ask them what their suggestions of the type of talk therapy it is that they would recommend with the symptoms that you're suffering with. Then you can go online and you can look for a therapist that perhaps matches the symptoms that you're looking for. There are a lot of directories, and again, I can send those to you as well, that you can go through to find which ones match your budget, match your lifestyle. Perhaps you want to be remote, perhaps you want to do it in person, perhaps you want to mix. There is genuinely so many different types of therapy available. For example, if you're going through significant trauma, you've got a different type of trauma therapy. Has its own therapy. EMDR is another form of therapy. So there's genuinely so many out there, and I appreciate how overwhelming it can be. So what I would say is go to your GP as your first port of call to find out what they recommend. So if you have the resources to get private therapy, or perhaps, your partner or yourself has insurance, health insurance through your work, you can also get the talk therapy and all these others through those port of calls as well. Other things that you can search for when you use AI, you can actually just type the terms in, perhaps the symptoms you're suffering with. Now, this is where you do have to be more aware about yourself. So when we think about metacognition, which is building self-awareness around what symptoms you have yourself, it is leaning into what can I do for myself. While we have all these resources, which is great, having awareness about what's going on with us can also significantly help you find the support that you need. Just by keeping a diary, you could just good old fashioned notebook, writing things down. And I know how overwhelming that can feel, when you're struggling to get out of bed as an example. But when you're feeling ready, just noting down, perhaps that you are struggling to get out of bed, you're struggling to shower, or perhaps those daily things that you're struggling to do are now becoming such a chore and they feel like such a burden. Another common symptom is perhaps when you're saying no to socializing. That's another common symptom that perhaps your mental health is struggling, and perhaps you're not being able to eat so much, or maybe you're eating more than usual, perhaps you're not being able to hydrate, or just look after yourself in general. Those are common symptoms that do come up to show that perhaps your mental health just needs a bit more of a balance. And so when these symptoms do come up, it does differ for everyone, but when these symptoms come up, noting them down can help you bring awareness to perhaps what is going on. So when you do speak to the GP or your mental health practitioner, you can also say to them, this is what I've been experiencing. And they might ask you some questions like, have you experienced any changes in your life? Have you found that anything has exacerbated these symptoms? And again, it just brings in to highlight what it is that they can support you with during this time. Sleep is another example. That's a very common example. You might be sleeping or wanting to sleep a lot more. You might struggle to sleep or switch off as well. And what I would say from a holistic perspective and looking at the whole person, when you are finding yourself changing, whether it's, with your family and loved ones, whether it's work or just day-to-day function. When you find these mental health challenges really affecting you day to day, this is when it's time to say, you know what, I need some support. Because often people say, oh no, I don't need to trouble it, and I'm not going through any trauma, nothing's happening to me. But if your mental health is stopping you from doing day-to-day functions, that is when it's time to say, you know what, I need to bring in some support. And that's not always easy for people to understand and comprehend that, you know what, I can't do this by myself. But something I always tell people is, you know what, you wouldn't expect a neurosurgeon to operate on their own brain, right? It's the same with mental health challenges. How are you expected to help yourself through these challenges if you're not aware yet of what's going on? So first, taking that step is often quite daunting. So even if you've got access to things like ChatGPT, you can put your symptoms in there. So, I've come up with these symptoms. What do you suggest I do? Right? It's efficient, it's quick, and we know that it can make mistakes, but it will give you direction of what perhaps you can read about. Because if you go to, for example, in your boroughs, if you've got NHS, if you're looking for NHS access therapies, you've got IAPT, and if you just type in your postcode or the area that you live in, it will give you the IAP service, and that gives you the talk therapy, which is available to you. But they do also have all these resources on there which talk about group talk therapy. It could be text therapy. It could be PDFs that you could read through yourself. It could give you guidance and support for your family as well. That's often comes up a lot with clients, is their family don't necessarily understand what's going on. And of course, the client themselves are struggling to comprehend what they're going through. So what these PDF documents do on these websites just help you alleviate some of that stress and say, you know what, family, this is what I'm suffering with. I just want to give you some insight, and here it is. So they also then can know how to understand and how to support you better. And we often think just about the person going through it themselves, but of course, all the loved ones they struggle as well, especially if they're not sure how to handle the situation, how best to be sensitive, how to support. Because, for example, if you're asking somebody who's got low mood, what's wrong, like every 5 seconds, that can also start a vicious cycle of guilt. And, it can be very frustrating for the person going through it, saying, look, I'm fine, I just need some space, or I just need some time. So it's finding out what works for you as an individual.
I think just on that last
result.
point, no, 100%. Thank you so much for kind of walking us through that. I think on the last point, sometimes we don't have the language maybe to communicate everything that we're kind of going through or feeling, and just need that space to. I felt this, to have that space to realize it ourselves, then find the language in order to communicate it, if that makes sense. And I love the point you mentioned there in terms of like the diary. So I keep a journal, and when I started journaling, I noticed a huge difference in just overall how I felt, right? Because it was like just writing as a way to kind of get out, for want of a better term, what was going on within kind of thing. So I love that you mentioned that. Going back, I just want to quickly go back to one of the first points we mentioned in terms of medication, what a prescription, etc. For medication. From my experience, seems to be one of the standards of care within a lot of like the Western systems. I'm curious if you have any insights into like why that is, so like from my experience going through mental health challenges, like probably over 8 years ago now, it was crazy to think that long ago, went to the GP, and one of the first things they gave was like pills, right? I never took them. And I guess a disclaimer that I'm not a doctor. So, but and this isn't medical advice, but from myself, like I couldn't make the association between how this pill was going to help the internal feelings that I was feeling, right? Like there was things going on in my life, so I couldn't make that association. So yeah, I'm just kind of quickly want to go back to that point. If you have any insights, being more in this field of like why the medication, maybe it's changed, maybe I'm out of the loop, is one of the first kind of standard of care go-tos, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Luke, honestly, well done for getting through what you did, because like you said, 8 years ago is a long time. We also know recovery takes a long time. To stick it out and say, you know what, I'm going to do what's right for me, even though you had practitioners saying to you, here's a quick fix, because that's essentially what the pills do in this example. So first of all, well done. That is not easy, and well done for talking about it, because again, that's something that not everyone's comfortable sharing with about. So yeah, well done. This is congratulations. It is a huge milestone. We often celebrate when we've passed a GCSE or we gone through school, but mental health and going through challenges coming out the end, which you have. And you're also passing on information to others about their health. It's something that you've always done with your podcast. You want to find alternative health therapies. What is out there so that people have access to this information? So not only have you got through your challenges, you're now helping others going through their challenges as well. And that takes a special kind of person. So I do just want to put it out there. It just shows the kind of person you are. So very, very glad that we got to meet. So in response to your question about medication, it is something that masks symptoms. That's essentially what medication can do for you. I'm not anti-medication. I want to put it out there. There is a place for it when it comes to mental health challenges. It can help people function. It can help people get to a point where they can, for example, at least string a sentence together because the emotions have stopped becoming so overwhelming. It can help them eventually get out of bed, as the example I used earlier, and also to shower, and also to eat, and also to talk to people, and to be able to get function back into their life. So medication does have its place. But as you said yourself, Luke, it's the awareness of what is right for you, and awareness, do I want to be on these? Are these right for me? And this is often where I think Western mental health prescriptions fall short, is they give us a prescription, but there is no education afterwards of what to do whilst you're on them, or perhaps how to come off them, or what happens when you do come off them, because that in itself can be just as overwhelming. Anyone who's taken any mental health medication will know that the side effects and the withdrawal symptoms are just as bad coming off them if you're not weaning yourself off them. So if you're not doing it as the doctor suggests, and normally it means, not just completely coming off them because those drugs are already in your in your system. You need to slowly come off them so you're not withdrawing, because sometimes your symptoms can even be made even worse if you do that too quickly. And even once you've managed to do that and you've weaned yourself off the medication, you have suddenly spent X amount of years on this medication numbing those emotions that have made it hard for you to function, as an example. So all of a sudden you're having all these emotions. Suddenly you're learning how to be sad again. You're learning anger, frustration, extreme emotions and conditions which your medication helped just balance out. So suddenly it's almost like you're a child again, trying to control your emotions. And again, that can feel overwhelming. And a lot of people, for that reason, find it easier to go back on medication because they're like, this is too much. I cannot handle these emotions on a day-to-day basis, because they've dealt with feeling almost numb for a period of time with this medication. So what my take on Western medication, you asked, why do we use them? First of all, they do have a place. But second of all, I think they really do need more education around how to use them, because they definitely can help people. Luke, you've always struck me as someone who's very mentally resilient. I hope you don't mind me using an example. But, you chose to not be on the medication because you're like, you know what, I'm going to search what else I can do for myself. So you had that mental resilience, despite your mental health challenges, to say, okay, I need to find another way, as well as dealing with your symptoms on a day-to-day basis, as well as functioning as a normal human being, which is not easy, right? Not everyone has that foresight. Not everyone has that resilience. So what this medication can do from a Western perspective is just help them get to that point. So you know what, now I can start looking for that therapist. Now I can start looking for a practitioner that can help me deal with unresolved trauma, as an example. So the reason with the therapy that I specifically specialize in is it's not to replace Western medicine as medication, as an example, and I've got it circled on my paper. It works alongside it. Because if we as a nation start saying, right, we don't need medication, let's throw it out, that can also be detrimental as well. Because for some people, say for example, you're a parent and you've got 4 children, you've got to pay the mortgage, you've got to make sure they get to school on time, you've got to make sure they're fed, there's basic physiological needs are met. If you are struggling and suddenly you're struggling and fighting yourself saying, I'm not going to go on medication, I'm just going to struggle through every day. If that medication could perhaps just help them, just give them a bit of an edge, just to sustain their energy so that they can do all that they need to function without crying at night because they feel like a horrible mum, then that has a place. But then it is down to the practitioner, but also the patient, to say, you know what, I've been on this for X amount of months or X amount of years. Perhaps it's time we look at me coming off them. And I want to start regaining function over my own body and my own nervous system. So my perspective on why Western medicine tends to go to straight to medication is because it does have a place, but it also, Western allopathic medicine does rely, it's based on symptomology. So what are your symptoms? Right. we are just going to treat those symptoms without looking at the root cause, okay, without looking at the whole person and their life and perhaps what they're going through or perhaps what they're experiencing. We just need to address those symptoms which are stopping you from functioning day to day. So they almost want you to just become a functioning human being again. And I know Western medicine does get a lot of bad press, but at the same time, it helps you function, right? We have the privilege that it can help us function. So if you want to use that, you absolutely can. But at the same time, it's that knowledge of knowing what else you can do on it. So that's my feelings on Western medicine, is the medication treats the symptoms rather than looking at the root cause. And that's where that's all the alternative therapies come into it. Does that make sense?
100% and 100% agree. I'm probably a little bit more, by the sound of it, skeptical of kind of just treating symptoms than maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, maybe like yourself, but I do recognize that for some people there is a place where they need it. But in my mind, like, I'm just like, if you're always treating symptoms and never getting to the root cause, then the symptoms are just going to continue to flare up, right? So like, I do feel like there's, in those situations like that, draw approach of like, okay, treat the symptoms to help you to function, and then also treat the root cause. And it just seems like sometimes, or most of the time, with Western medicine, it's just the symptoms, right? And it's almost like we have to take it upon ourselves to go and seek the root cause, as you said, from some of the other alternative therapies. I find it interesting we call them alternative therapies, because even though they get to like the root cause, and I feel like that's just the root cause that's almost sometimes like the most important. That's just kind of my bias, I guess, a bit. Do you want to come in on that? Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Luke, this is what I've said this to you before, you're mentally resilient. So you have the knowledge and know-how to say, yeah, you know what, I need to go further. You said yourself, you were journaling, you writing, it helped your symptoms, because when we do conscious journaling, is the most cathartic method we can use, because often we don't know what's going on in our brain, right? So if you're just writing or typing and letting go of everything, you're bringing to the forefront what it is that perhaps is coming up, which you may not recognize yourself because you're overthinking, or perhaps there's things going on in your brain. So you're somebody who is able to do that. So even when you're going through those mental health challenges, you could journal, you could look at ways to perhaps treat the root cause symptoms, as you said. I personally, from the clients that I've met, they are very resilient people, and they have chosen not to go on medication, but they also have the means to come to a private therapist and say, right, this is what I need, this is what we can do. Now, not everyone has that luxury, right, to say, right, I'm going to seek out a therapist because I have the resources or means to do so. So I think that's something that's really important to take in mind, is when we look at the whole landscape, what is available to us if you don't necessarily have the resources is NHS, right? Is the internet, and is those therapeutic services. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with using those services. A lot of people are anti-therapy and talk therapy. We think about people, as you said, medication treats the symptoms, and they will come back. Of course they will come back, because of course that's what we're doing. We are suppressing what is happening. If we don't understand what is going on from a deep level, how are we going to treat that, right? But first, for some people, they do need to just be able to function and just balance and manage their symptoms to be able to get to the point where you are. So the way that I see it is that, Luke, this is you when you had your mental health challenges, and you were, you're trying to find outside of your brain what is going on, and also what's inside of your brain, so that you can help get to the root cause, as you said. Now, for a lot of people who are going through mental health challenges, they are here. And I don't mean this in levels, but in terms of their recovery. So they are just trying to function. So they're not even there yet to be able to understand what's going on around their brain and what's going in their brain. They just need to be able to get to that point that they can even, string a sentence together sometimes. So they are from the clients that I've worked with, they're very different points of how to get to that awareness. And that's often why they come to me and they say, right, I know this is what I'm dealing with. Let's get to work. Let's get to work together. And they have the autonomy and strength to say that. But a lot of people don't in the situation. And I'm with you. And that's why I do the treatment and therapy that I do, because I strongly believe that we do need to look at the person as a whole. It's not enough to just say, right, okay, you're waking up with migraines, you perhaps have not been sleeping very well, perhaps your performance at work has been dwindling, as an example, perhaps your hair is thinning, all classic signs of burnout stress is, very, very common. Yeah, it's easy. I'll give you some not me personally, but the doctor will give you antidepressants to perhaps equilibrate, or anti-anxiety medication, whatever it is that they prescribe you. And as you said, you'll keep doing the same thing. You'll carry on with the same lifestyle. You'll eat the same things. You'll be talking to the same people in the same way that you always did. You won't be looking at your life and your lens to say, what else can I change? What is it that might be causing those symptoms? And you carry on thinking those pills are a magic eraser, that everything's going to get better. And they do, they help you function, as I said. But the therapies that I'm interested in, the therapies that I do for my clients, are ones that help it look at you whole. And we take that step back and we say, okay, what's going on? Where particularly is this coming from? Because as you said, it's not something that just yours, you said took 8 years, your recovery, right? And I'm sure, it's taken some time to work through that as well as getting to that point that you can talk about. That's how long it's been. And that's where my mental health challenges lie. So it takes time. It takes time. But I'm with you, Luke. I'm totally with you. For me, I understand the need of Western medication. I understand where the Western point of view is, but I'm also understanding of Eastern, let's say, and alternative therapies that general medical practitioners don't necessarily have in their practice or don't have the knowledge. Or, they have their rules and they have their ethics that they have to abide by, so they don't fall under that. They make the oath. So I see both perspectives, and I'll always make sure that when I speak to my clients, what is going to work best for them. But I'm not just going to say to them, only use this treatment or only use that treatment. I'll always give them as much information as I have to share with them and say, look, this is what's available to you. What sounds good to you? Because you know yourself better than anyone, Luke. You said yourself, you knew that when you were prescribed medication, you were like, nope, this isn't for me. You just knew, right? And you said yourself, you didn't necessarily have a medical background, but you knew about your body and you knew how you operated. Now, that is something a medical practitioner or any practitioner cannot tell you. So you've obviously got to the point that you've understood about your body and how your brain works enough to say, I know what I want in my life. So again, hats off to you. That's all I can say.
Thank you. In terms of neuroscience, what is neuroscience and what's its kind of connection relationship with what we've been talking about, mental health?
So neuroscience is the operation of the inner workings of our brain. Something that we still don't know much about. Neuroscience is one of the newer science when we think about psychology and mental health. It is very much still in the dark. So we know the basic functions, things like neuroplasticity, neurons, and how they fire, as an example. We know those and we know how they function, but we don't necessarily know how everything connects, as an example. And it's something I was reading up. It's called connectonomics. It's like genomics, understanding how these neurons connect together and how they work. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's going to help us in the mental health landscape of understanding what it is that happens in our brain. So we have mental health, which everyone has, in the same way that we have physical health, right? So when we come up with mental health challenges, we come under the mental ill health bracket, right? Is the best way to say it, is because you need some help. Essentially, it's not a degrading way to say it. It's just saying, my mental health is not where it should be right now. I need some help. Psychology is a great avenue, because what psychology does, it helps us understand how, from a cognitive psychology point of view, helps us understand how we can operate and how we can put these things into our brain on a day-to-day basis. What neuroscience does, it works out the science of how the brain actually operates. So when we combine cognitive neuroscience and cognitive psychology, those are the underpinning methods to use when we're talking about mental health challenges, because that helps us understand cognitively what our brain is doing. What do we need to do to make our brain function in the way that we need it to function? And that's when we talk about emotions, thoughts, behaviors, patterns, physical symptoms are a classic. So those areas are often ones that we can determine what we're doing with. So if you're going through mental health challenges, if you can understand, for example, and I'm going to use stress because that comes up a lot with my clients. If you're dealing with a lot of stress, and one is that I'm not working hard enough, I'm not doing enough, right? That comes up quite a lot. As a result, your behaviors are that perhaps you're not eating right, perhaps you're not sleeping properly, perhaps, you're checking your phone first thing in the morning. These are behaviors and patterns that come up as a result of what is happening, right? Then as a result, we go into the other bracket of there being physical symptoms. And a result of this stress and thoughts behaviors is, if you're not getting very much good sleep, cognitively speaking, the next day, you are a walking zombie and you can drink all the caffeine you want, but it's not going to actually help your cognitive function move any further. It just helps you keep awake, essentially. Another symptom, a physical symptom, is you might be having heart palpitations because of the stress that is happening and that's going on in your body. And another physical symptom could be that you're getting muscle aches is another one as well, because your stress is something that attacks your immune system. So of course, if your immune system is compromised, it means everything else is going to be compromised as well. So all these symptoms that I spoke about quite commonly come up because they are your body's way of saying to you, you need to pause. Our body's always trying to protect us. We always think of those symptoms as a bad thing, but actually they're trying to stop you from it getting worse and these symptoms are getting worse. At this point, you should be saying, oh my God, I'm getting these heart palpitations. Perhaps I'm getting these muscle aches. I need to perhaps pause and look at what I can do to de-stress myself before it gets to the point that perhaps I'm getting a heart attack or perhaps I'm getting a panic attack, as an example. So that's how neuroscience fits into the bracket of mental health. We have mental health. Everyone has it. But if we don't understand what is going on in our brain or how we can operate to make it work better, then there's no point, right?
Yeah, 100%. So why do you think that most people, at least from kind of my experience, kind of lack that kind of consciousness, self-awareness and then just like plow through, so they might have the headaches, they might have the muscle cramps, etc. And then they obviously feel it, but they don't make that association between the headache, the muscle cramp, and needing to potentially slow down or change something in their life. And yeah, just kind of like, for me, lack this kind of overall awareness and consciousness. Is that due to our modern day lifestyle? You talked us through kind of any insights you have there from the clients you've worked with.
Absolutely. So just to make sure that I'm getting the question right, so you're asking why perhaps some people have this lack of awareness between what they need to do to get themselves to the point that they are in recovery. Is that essentially what you're asking, right?
Yeah. So, so if someone is, working a lot of hours at work and, maybe they're into fitness as well, doing a lot of kind of exercise, like all this stress, obviously exercise is the good stress, right, on the body, but it's still stress, right? And then they've got a family and kind of all these kind of inputs, etc. And so they are experiencing the symptoms of headache, muscle cramps, etc. But they're not necessarily making the connection between all the stress in their life and the symptoms that they're experiencing. It just seems that, especially with like hustle culture, etc., we just kind of ignore the symptoms, right, and just continue to plow through. I'm just wondering if you have any insights on why that is and then how we can start to reverse that change.
Absolutely. I'm going to actually circle back to the point you said about exercise, because in fact, fitness, yes, while it does have its benefits, when you are dealing with stress, what we don't also sometimes know is sometimes the type of exercise you do can actually add to the stress. So an example, if you're, for example, doing really high cardio exercise first thing in the morning and you haven't perhaps eaten or had anything to sustain that protein, that can sometimes exacerbate stress because our cortisol is the stress hormone, which is at its highest within the first 2 hours of waking up. So if you're somebody who's suffering with chronic stress and suddenly you're doing something that adds that stress to that body, that can actually exacerbate the symptoms. Now, everyone's very different. I'm not saying this is for everyone. This is for the people that I've worked with, that it's a pattern that I've noticed. So things like yoga, Pilates, yin yoga is particularly good. So things that are just making you more aware of the movements you're making, and breathing is a huge thing. Just taking long deep breaths into the exercise you're choosing to do can really help regulate your body as well as breath work. So after that, the fitness, and something else I want to talk about is the hustle culture. As you said, it's something that is something that's very convenient for us. I mean, you don't even have to leave your house now. Everything gets delivered to your door, right? So when we talk about stress as a whole, and you're working late, you're working all these hours, you're like, don't worry, I'll get my groceries delivered to my door. It's fine, I'll have my meetings online now. So you don't even necessarily need to leave your house. You need to physically move, maybe do 200 steps in a day if you need to go to the bathroom, essentially. What this means is it feeds into this chronic stress life because you think that this is how we should be working. This is how productivity works. But if you're somebody who is living that lifestyle and you think that that's a lifestyle that is working for you, how can you bring that awareness to get to recovery is essentially what you're saying. How can we bring that consciousness to that point and say, right, this isn't working for me. I need to do something about it. What I've found with my client base is the ones that have come to me and recognize that they need help are often the people who are constantly working on themselves. So even before they came to me, they have always found ways to help themselves get through whatever it is that they're getting through life. So they've always been autonomous. And the reason I say this, I mean, being a private therapist is very different to being a public available, because it means that people do need to have the resources. They do need to have the autonomy to say, you know what, I need help and I'm going to go to this person when things get a bit too much for themselves. What I've discovered as well is that they are people that often have not meshed well with the families, with their biological families, or, you know, the guardianships that they've been brought up in. They've often felt very different to the people they've been surrounded with, and perhaps they haven't had the support with their friend circles. So these people have often found that they've had to get through their challenges by themselves. So perhaps their parents just haven't been empathetic enough with what they're going through. Perhaps their partner just doesn't understand or even take the time to understand what they're going through. So my clients have always been people, even before they came to me, they've always found ways to work through their challenges. And so what I've observed is the people that are perhaps, you know, we have the consultation at the beginning to say, you know, are you ready for this? This is the protocol that I would suggest that we go through. That's the point that you understand when people are ready to face what's coming up versus those who don't. So the ones that you talked about who are conscious are the ones that say, yes, Heema, let's get started, let's get to work. The ones that perhaps are not ready to face that are the ones that say, you know what, this isn't for me right now. And they just, when I asked for feedback as well, they said, this is just too much. I don't want to face this right now. I don't want to have to confront what has come up right now, because anything that comes up, so symptom-wise, and we go back to the example we've been using around stress and working too much and the hustle culture. When that comes up, we know that's an indication that something else is going on, right? And you need to address that further. That person in that example who isn't ready to go further with the work and is not ready to face up to what could perhaps come up. And when we delve deeper, when we go back into our subconscious, because when we talk about how do we bring awareness, we have to go into our subconscious to do this kind of work. The awareness is, okay, yes, you know, the symptoms are coming up, you know, I'm tired all the time, I'm lethargic, I'm irritable, like do not get me on a morning without coffee, as an example. If you're somebody suffering with chronic stress, that's the only thing that helps me function, right? And we know caffeine can, again, exacerbate symptoms in some cases. If somebody is not conscious enough to be aware of that, they will not necessarily be ready to face up to what is being masked in this situation. That's my experience with the clients that I've had who aren't yet ready. And, you know, they will often ask me questions further down the line. It's like, oh, you know, why is this happening? And, you know, you give them possibly an answer of why. And they ask, well, what can I do for it? And you give them an answer, but they're not yet ready to do that because they're not yet ready to face up to what is coming up. And when we think about the subconscious is often what gives us these symptoms, because the subconscious is telling us, you know what, hold on a minute, this isn't aligning with your journey or the purpose or what you're here for, or something that doesn't align with the soul. It speaks deeper to you. That's what the subconscious, in my experience, does for us. The conscious is all the symptoms. It's the physical symptoms that are saying, you know what, they're warning signs. They're saying, you know what, Luke, come on now, we need to deal with this, right? So if you're not ready to face those symptoms, you're not going to be ready to face the deeper symptoms, which is everything that's buried in the subconscious. Because of course, subconscious can bring up things from your childhood. It can bring up things from past relationships, or perhaps, you know, anything that you haven't dealt with. It's like open Pandora's box, the subconscious. If you're not ready for it, you're like, oh my God, you know, I thought I dealt with this. And a lot of programming is a result of things that have happened and are buried deep into the subconscious. That programming then carries on into our present life. And so if you think about this, Luke, there's so much work to do with treating these symptoms from the root cause. It's not just about, right, I need to calm my heart down, I need to get a better sleep pattern, I need to eat the right foods and get the right exercise in. I also need to rewind and look at all the programming that I'm currently doing, and I need to deprogram myself into a new existence and a new life, and perhaps a new person at the end of this, somebody that other people may not even recognize, that you may not even recognize yourself. If you think about that's a lot of work, but that's also way out of people's comfort zone, because you're talking, you know, the clients I have can range from all the way from 18 all the way up to 70. Now they've spent some of them a majority of their lives existing in this comfort zone of who they are, who they define themselves by, their mothers, their fathers, their children, you know, whatever their role is. And so suddenly me as a facilitator is saying, are you ready to do this? They're suddenly being faced with the mirror to say, oh my God, I need to undo all of everything I've ever known in some cases to move forward.
So just on that point, because that in itself, right, as you said, is out of people's comfort zone, but it can also be overwhelming to a lot of people that, you know, I need to do the sleep, you know, the eating right and kind of all these things. I kind of see it as a lifestyle and as a journey that one embraces. How do people approach this with the mindset so they don't get overwhelmed, if that makes sense? So they do kind of all those things that in society we quote unquote know to do to live a healthy life, eat, exercise, good sleep, etc., but also do the inner work as well alongside that. Does that make sense? Because I feel like all of it sometimes can feel overwhelming to people with all these things they quote unquote need to do. We'll get back talking to Heema Shah in just one moment, but before we do so, I would just like to pause and take a quick break to mention Soma Breath. Soma Breath is a holistic school and community with no single guru, where you get to learn the science and practice of breathwork through a range of pranayama breathing techniques and discover the power of breathwork for yourself. Breathwork, meditation, and a range of mindfulness practices have been a game changer in my own mental health and well-being journey. And what I love about Soma is that it's tailored to your specific needs. It combines ancient wisdom with modern science to help promote overall wellness and longevity, reduce stress and anxiety, and achieve holistic health, including our mental health. From their online courses to membership to live classes and certification programs, with Soma Breath, you have everything that you need to get started on your breathwork journey with a like-minded community right by your side. Get started on your Soma Breath journey today by visiting the link in the show note description and experience the transformation of breathwork for yourself. Now, let's dive back into today's episode with Heema Shah.
Yeah, so what you're asking is, where do you get that knowledge from of how to work through these physical symptoms and the inner workings? Is that what you're asking?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're asking from my perspective of having treated my clients and supported them and helped them, I'd probably say facilitated their journey, actually, if anything, because they are the ones who've always said, you know what, I know this isn't working for me, and so I need support. Now, if we dissect that as to how can we help those who perhaps don't have the same self-awareness as them to say, I need knowledge on my physical symptoms and inner workings, it is about educating. That's all it is. It's educating yourself and saying, is important to me. What do I want to achieve in this life? Do I want to achieve balance? Do I want to achieve contentness in, what I'm doing? Stress, again, what I'm referring to the clients that I've worked with, often what I've seen with people suffering with chronic stress are those that are trying to charge ahead and feed into the expectations of what other people have told them or expected of them, rather than doing something that works for them. And we do get inundated, and I'm going back to the hustle culture, social media, we get inundated with, how we should be living, what we should be doing, what kind of exercise, what kind of protein we should be eating, how we should be dressing, and, all of that jazz when it comes to work and lifestyle. So for somebody who doesn't necessarily have that self-awareness, first of all, I hope that they're listening to this podcast, because then they will understand that first of all, they've already taken the first step. Just by listening, just by seeking what is out there is the first step to build self-awareness around yourself. You don't have to take action. As you said, overwhelming is one of the huge work comes up with mental health challenges. Overwhelming is often what comes up. So if you're feeling like, I don't want to do anything, I don't need to do anything, you absolutely don't need to do anything just yet. Just by listening to, for example, Raising Consciousness with Luke, all of his amazing episodes. If you listen to his episodes or you listen to another podcast, if that is something that serves you, listen. Just listen. You just have to listen. You don't have to take any action whatsoever. And set yourself little, small, attainable goals. That's the key with this. No one's saying you've got to do this overnight. No one's got to say there's any timeline with your mental health recovery. But it is finding something that works for you. So if you found, for example, that you are perhaps knowing that something isn't aligning, finding resources for yourself and setting those achievable goals of listening or perhaps feeding into your own lifestyle can just make those small changes first of all. That's often the road to recovery, is just making those small sustainable changes. And it's very different for everyone, Luke. Every single person's planet with their mental health recovery journey is so different how they do it. And that's why I'm very general when I say set yourself goals. Because, for example, somebody who perhaps is dealing with complex PTSD as an example, if I was to suggest to sit down and meditate, 2 minutes in the morning, this could in fact exacerbate the symptoms. Meditation and sitting in silence can sometimes bring up the flashbacks, an example. It can bring out the night sweats. So it is first understanding what it is that perhaps is not functioning to bring self-awareness. And the easiest thing, as you said, Luke, write it down or type it, or, whichever visual practice that works for you. You can even record it if that helps, and just say, right, what did I used to do that I can't necessarily do right now? And that's where, we have the scales to say, that perhaps what was happening the last 2 weeks, perhaps my low mood has got worse, and perhaps my anxiety's got worse. And you say, okay, right, what's happened as a result of this? So you can start off with perhaps where the differences are. Then you identify what is happening as a result. And just as a first step, just consciously making that effort to say, what is it that isn't working for me right now? So at this point, you don't even just think about the root cause. Don't even need to delve deeper or deprogram or anything like that. That is way down the line. First is just saying, what is not working for me? What is it that I would like to change? And this isn't external people telling you what to do. This is what you want to do. It comes back to you. What is it that you want to change? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. What's one thing that you've learned about people or mental health, mental well-being, neuroscience, working with the clients that you've worked with?
What's the one thing I've learned?
Yeah.
How resilient human beings can be. From the day that I started doing this work, it has opened my eyes to the sufferings that people go through, because it's not something that everyone talks about, but also how they choose to recover from them. People are a lot more resilient than they give themselves credit for.
How does one build resilience?
That is one thing I've learned. Sorry?
So on that point, what have you kind of learned, like how people build that resilience? Is it an innate quality that you think we all have, or is it something that you think people develop and build over time?
I think it's definitely something we have innate in us. The levels of resilience are something that we can nurture, and how much we choose to nurture as well. And that's something that I'm very interested in. That's something I'm currently researching, is resilience, actually, because when I've had these conversations with these wonderful people, not just clients, but just loved ones and, just day-to-day conversations, and they talk about things and challenges that they've been through, I'm like, where does this come from? Exactly like you said, Luke, how can you build this resilience? And when you delve a bit deeper and ask these questions, these people have often gone through significant trauma in their lives that we could never understand or even comprehend, or even possibly go through in our lifetime. And these people have, and they're still here, smiling, functioning day to day. And something that comes up a lot is epigenetics and ancestral trauma. And in the same bracket is ancestral resilience. So we talk about ancestral trauma, that's quite a common term used. And, that's just social media, and we focus on the things that have happened to us, but we don't focus on the things that actually ancestrally we've been passed on this resilience as well. So if you look back, I guarantee these people that are extremely good at being resilient have already been through generational resilience themselves. And so it's been passed down. And we now know from a neuroscience perspective that these things are passed down, right? It doesn't change our gene code, but those things of resilience are passed down. So for example, somebody's granddad who they were sharing with me, and it's a friend, so I know that she'll be fine with sharing it. They were a prisoner of war. They were kept in a concentration camp. But the way that she said it was just like a story, as if you're telling, I just went to the grocery store. Like there wasn't any, poor granddad, what did he go through? You could see the strength in this person when she was telling this story. And it made so much sense of the strength that she carries herself. When she tells me about what she's been through in her lifetime, I'm like, how do you get through this? And when she shared this with me, it made so much sense, because that granddad in that moment would have said, you know what, I'm going to encode it myself to make sure that future generations don't go through this. And they would have found that resilience to get through that situation, whatever it is. And I can't imagine the horrors, right? But you can imagine what it must have taken someone to get through that and survive and come out the other end, to be able to tell the tale, and to say, what, I'm going to carry on with life. I'm going to choose life. So that has been passed down, and to be able to share those legacies is what builds resilience. So the more we talk about these stories of how, somebody has, somebody's grandparent or someone's parent or somebody that has gone through something, it also builds resilience in us to remind us that there is hope, that there are things that we can always work through. If you're somebody who is surrounded by people who have not perhaps worked through things and they've never seen the light of hope, you would never know existed. So you would not even know there's such a thing as, oh God, I can build resilience, I can build hope. So I'd say on the question that you said, how can somebody build resilience? Is it innate? Yes, I think we have resilience that's innate in all of us. I think the levels that we choose to grow at when we think of resilience is down to us to nurture. But I definitely think we can build on resilience. I think we can choose resilience. We always have a choice. When I'm talking to people and they say to me, oh yeah, but I've did this, it's natural, everyone would do it in this example. I'm like, no, it's a conscious choice to make that difference. It's a conscious choice to be resilient in that situation. So you know what? I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to leave a situation that isn't serving me as an example. I'm going to take that leap of faith and put my health first and say enough is enough. My resilience, my mental health comes first. I come first before anything else.
What's one thing it did. And resilience is a very important trait. Very interested in the ancestral trauma kind of topic as well. So if you're an expert on that, we'll bring you back on in a future episode to talk about that. To bring this one to a close, Heema, what's one thing that we didn't get to speak about today related to mental health, neuroscience, etc., that you think that we should have or could have spoken about during our time?
I think you've asked really good broad questions, honestly, Luke. You've asked a lot of questions where people who are listening, perhaps if they don't know where to go, there might be some pointers hopefully in there that they can seek help, which I think is one of the integral parts of mental health recovery, is first saying something isn't working for me. What can I do to get this help now? And give yourself compassion, give yourself kindness on this recovery journey, because, and we're often not told this, stress and burnout can often take up to 6 years to recover from. It might take you 3 months to get into that point of burnout, and I mean extreme burnout, but it can take years to fully recover and get from that state of fear to a state of calmness and feeling safe again. Give yourself time, compassion. And I would always say, speak to your employers about your mental health challenges. And I don't mean going into the nitty-gritty, because that's personal to you, but making them aware of perhaps the challenges that you're suffering with. Because often there'll be, for example, you can be referred to an occupational therapist, or they often have something called employment assistant programs, EAPs for short, in their organizational offerings, which are a perk. And that is something you have access to for most companies. So I think that's really important. We didn't used to have this in place, when we talk about mental health challenges, not being able to speak to our management team about. But it just means you're going to get the support that you need, because what you don't need is having the pressure of having to pay the bills, but also having the pressure of not even being able to sleep all night because you're so anxious about having going to the office the next day, as an example, which is often what comes a lot, anxiety, being out in public is often that something comes hand in hand with stress. Facing people comes in hand. So if you can talk to your manager about this and say, look, I'm really suffering with this. When you have your one-to-ones, they can check in with you. I'm hoping your managers are empathetic. And, they can check in with you and they can offer some guidance as well of what perhaps you can do to break down your load, or perhaps how to handle your workload a lot better. So I would always say, speak to your employers about what's going on. And if you're self-employed, as an example, speak to your clients. You're a human. Do not get to the point that you can't function by, overwhelming your nervous system and taking on too much work and not allowing those people in. I'm not talking about being really candid and sharing your whole life stories, but it's just saying, as an example, I switch off at 6 o'clock and they've sent you a request, at 5:45 in the evening, and they're like, I want this now. And you say to them, I'm about to finish my work day, but I will be happy to get on to it. And you give them a time that works for you. So then it's that accountability communication. So I say, talk to your employees, talk to your clients, in this case, if you're self-employed, about what's going on, and talk to your friends and family as well. Educate them if you can with what's going on in your life, because they can also feel, shut out. And sometimes that can make it harder for you because they're not being able to support you in the right way. But if you don't communicate with them what's going on, then they can't expect to read your minds either. And that's the whole piece of allowing people to know what's going on as much as you're comfortable.
Just quickly on the employer point, what would be your recommendation, or just thoughts, insights you have from working with people? Let's say they go to their employer, but they get a bad response. Like for me, I never had the confidence, courage, to when I was in the job market, the 9-to-5 world, that actually contributed to a lot of the stuff that I was going in. Completely different story. I never had like the courage to go to my upline or my manager or my boss, and I would assume, maybe I shouldn't, that a lot of people would also feel uncomfortable about doing so, stigma attached, etc. I do think times are potentially changing, but let's just say they kind of get over that and go and get a bad reply, response, etc. How does one learn like deal with that? Maybe it goes back to the resilience point we were talking about.
Yeah, it does go back to resilience, but also when, especially as you said, if you've got a really unfortunate leader that doesn't necessarily empathize or give you support, more times in the company there are other leaders that can perhaps guide you. So even if it's not your direct line manager, you can go to other leadership and talk to them in confidence and say, I'm really struggling. What can I do with this? And HR, human resources, is there for a reason. I know that a lot of people think it's there to protect the company. Yes, absolutely, they have that role, but they also have the role to look after their workforce, because of course the workforce is what drives the organization. So they are there and they will have resources in place to direct you with support that they can help you with. And you know, Luke, you said that you didn't have the confidence or courage when you were doing a 9 to 5 to go to your manager, and a stigma is always attached to this. Stigma is always attached. You always think, they can think less of me if their example. If there's a promotion coming up, they're perhaps not going to put me forward because they may not think I can cope because of X, Y, Z, because of the mental health challenges. That comes up quite a lot. There's often a lot of people will say, I've got this competitive worker, but I need to get that. I need to land that promotion. So they think by not telling their managers everything that's going on, they think that's actually serving them, but it's actually quite the opposite. Because if, for example, like you said, there was a negative feedback with this, and you've gone to another management and said, I need some, support with this, and they might help you. You can then also go back to your GP. You've always got them to be able to sign you off for sickness. So you have that leeway just to recalibrate yourself. And so once you've got that legal document of however long the doctor signs you off for, you can then say, right, okay, my boss isn't very helpful, and perhaps, other management hasn't been very helpful, but I can take back what I need to do. So instead of having to worry about work every day, you can just take that break and say, right, what is it that I need? And you might just be, right, I just need, 2 days in bed or whatever it is, without the pressure of thinking, oh my God, that good old Microsoft Teams noise comes every 5 seconds, or the email is pinging, or somebody's trying to get hold of you, etc., etc. It alleviates some of the pressure off that time. If you've got annual leave yourself, book yourself somewhere that gives you that time to breathe. It might be, going to the beach if you're local to a beach. Hiking is so great when you're suffering with any kind of mental health challenge, in terms of, I'm talking about anxiety, stress, things that your body doesn't want you to do, you have to take charge to do. So in this example, if you're taking some time out and you're saying, I'm going to take charge of my own symptoms because my boss isn't helping me, what are those symptoms? What can I do to get through this? You can then go for a walk. For example, our bodies, when we're suffering with a lot of mental health challenges, they will tell us to do things to keep us safe. So they're going to say, right, stay in bed, don't go outside, don't move. We need to protect you right now, whether it's fight or flight or fawn, whichever it is that your body's responding to, it would do that. So you need to then know what the next step is to get out of that. So if you've got that silence and that time, whether it's annual leave or personal time off, or if you've been taking some time off for sick, you can think about that and say, well, actually, what helps me get out of that? Because we often think, oh no, my body's telling me to slow down. Yeah, it absolutely is. But it can also tell you to stop. And sometimes you need to have that know-how of saying, well, actually, I need to step over that and say, to help myself. If in this example, you haven't got your management support, then I would suggest looking for another job. I would suggest looking for something that honestly works for yourself. I'm not saying quitting a job, because that is not always an option when you're financially responsible for paying bills, or whatever it is that you're financially responsible for paying the kids' bills, is looking at the path that you can find another job, that it is possible. We're very fortunate with the job market that we have here, that we can just go from job to job. It doesn't mean that we have to stay in one sector, one job for the rest of our life. So don't add to your pressure by completely quitting the job, because you'll also have the added pressure of financial and thinking, oh, how am I going to pay the bills by the end of the month if I'm at work? And that's just going to add to your symptoms. So those are just some pointers I suggest. Talk to your GP always first port of call. Talk to your GP about how you're feeling. Ask them what they would recommend, because they also have your medical records. So they also know perhaps what medication you're on, and, what life challenges you've had yourself and how you've come out of them the other end. So they might be able to say, you know what, Luke, we did this last time. Why didn't you try this? And you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that. And it might be then you take up yin yoga, as I suggested, on a Tuesday night after work, or whatever it is that you do. So those are things I suggest if your manager is unfortunately being efficient with you. Check your manual as well. So your handbook that you'll get when you sign with an organization, you often get, you're met with one, and they will have everything in there about what you can do in these examples as well. And I'd be careful about confiding in colleagues, because you want to be careful that you trust them, because the last thing you want to do is for them to telling the whole office of what you're going through, and then everyone coming to you with, not the right information. So if you've got people you trust, confide in them, talk to them, they might to help you as well at work.
Excellent. Heema, where should people go if they want to keep up to date with your work and learn more about what you do?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. So I often write, I've got a Neuroscience Unplugged letter on there, a newsletter that I do weekly, which talks about the latest neuroscience research into practical tips to help with your personal growth. So yeah, meet me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram as well, Spiritual Sacred Space. And that's more for my neuroscience personal growth, using spiritual methods as a route to treat causes. And so those are my main sources where you can find me. You can always email me at info@spiritualsacredspace.com or heemashah.uk@gmail.com. But yeah, any questions anyone's got or redirection or support, please ask away.
Heema, thank you for your time today. I've learned a lot, been reminded of a lot. And as you said there, we didn't really talk about like the spiritual aspects of kind of how that relates to neuroscience, but also I had some questions around the mental health side. So we'll definitely bring you back on to get those answered as well. Maybe a bit woo-woo for some people, but I feel like it's a conversation that needs to have, because spirituality from my side isn't woo-woo, right? It's just like our culture's perception of it. So I would love to kind of squash those ultimately, but thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Luke. I would definitely be back on with that, because I did my master's on Reiki, and that absolutely is not woo-woo. There is science behind it. So I'm with you. We'll bring all the spirituality to the conscious, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me, Luke.
You're welcome. I hope that you've enjoyed my conversation today with Heema Shah, as we have been discussing and talking about mental health and a little bit of neuroscience as well. Heema will be back on the podcast very, very soon, so look out for that episode as we continue our conversation and dive more into the spiritual connection between spirituality and our mental health and well-being, an episode I'm really looking forward to. But in terms of this episode, what are you taking away from our conversation today, and what positive changes are you going to make in your life as a result? I would love to hear from you. So do leave a comment or review below this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I do read every single comment and review, and appreciate you being here and tuning in to the show today. I look forward to sharing the next episode of the podcast with you really, really soon. See you then.